I walked into the living room and Kareem was in there. She's sitting on the floor, wrapping presents, as you would on Christmas Eve, with a little, glass of something next to her. And I said, Kareem, can you just look? Can you just check this? And I remember her face now. She turned to me. She looked concerned, but she said, Mum, what time is it? So I said, it's 9:30, something like that, 9:20. And then I repeated that I wanted her to check my reel before I placed it on Instagram. And she said, do you think that, very gently, do you think that Instagram is the best place to be, the best place, use of your time on Christmas Eve, when you could be relaxing and getting into the Christmas spirit? And those words reduced me to tears. Hello, my lovelies. How are you? How are you doing? Welcome to season 6, episode 8, and the final episode in the season of Menopause Whilst Black, the podcast. I am committed to sharing the stories of Black people experiencing menopause, primarily based in the UK. And I'm coming to you on a wonderfully sunny May day, long overdue. It's not exactly warm for May, or not the way that we're used to, but certainly I am enjoying it. I'm drinking some decaffeinated green tea. I fancied something hot, and I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. So despite and in spite of outside world events, I'm determined to feel good. I think that sometimes we wake up and we forget that we have a choice. My choice is also include wearing my happy, choosing clothing to lift my mood. So today I've chosen a beautiful, gifted, full-length Ankara skirt with orange accents and a t-shirt with that hottie Colin cap on it, taking a knee. And I've got bright orange earrings. I stepped out into the sunshine, and within 5 minutes, 2 complete strangers had complimented me. So wear your happy. Yes, it starts with you. You choose something that really makes you feel good or makes you smile, but the happiness spreads. Do you wear your happy? I discovered Wear Your Happy. I called it that. We're talking almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago. I was entering a spell of deep depression. I had left my career behind, my almost 30 years, 28-year teaching career behind, unexpectedly. I hadn't expected to. I expected to continue teaching until I retired and then wait around for my grandkids. So it was a shock, but I'd reached a point where staying in work was untenable. And so I left work thinking that would solve the problem, not realising or not really clocking that I was also entering post-menopause. It had been a while since I'd had a period. It had been a year. But I was most concerned about the fact that I'd been diagnosed with anxiety and depression. Anyway, I leave teaching, and at the same time, or just afterwards, my late Aunt Monica passed away unexpectedly. And this, together, the grief of her passing, and also the grief of not having my status anymore, if that makes sense, not knowing what to do, I floundered a bit. And so I entered a deeper depression. That meant for me, as someone who had always loved clothing and loved style, that I didn't bother about what I wore, that I often didn't leave the house. This is a well-known story that I've told before. But I noticed that when I started to get better, it was around using what I had around me to help me. Yes, I decided to go to therapy. And as I've said before, that is the best gift I was able to give myself. But also, I wanted to be able to continue and I wanted to move on. And one of the things I did was stop thinking about what people thought about me. It was gradual, it wasn't a conscious decision. The conscious decision was about choosing bright coloured clothes or clothes that my Aunt Monica had worn or clothing that had been given to me or clothing from a holiday. But as I started to make those choices around dressing for me and not for others, I realised that other things slotted into place. And it meant that I cared less about what others thought and more about turning the gaze on myself and my own self-care and my own mental well-being. So when in the last episode, the latest episode, episode 7, Lanice Brothers, she is Eat Love Move on Instagram and TikTok, but she's author of You Can Have a Better Period, the book that came out in 2022. When she talked about the estrogen being a feminizing hormone and the hormone of accommodation, that really, really spoke to me.
Estrogen is a feminizing hormone. Mm-hmm. And as you move out of your period and your estrogen levels are rising, this is the time where you might actually start to say yes to things that you should maybe say no to. Because sometimes with this feminizing aspect, we can be more accommodating than we should be. If you kind of jump to the end of the menstrual cycle, right before the period, where sometimes we would get called, we say what's on our mind and we kind of lose that filter and we get called bitchy or, excuse my language, or, having, PMS or, moody, when actually we've lost, our estrogen is declining naturally. And so we don't have that more of that hormone of accommodation. And we're really actually saying what we really think.
Mental well-being, a routine, and creativity, these heal. For me, certainly, when I was no longer getting up and going to a salaried job, getting used to not having a salary drop into my account every month and trying to navigate what I was going to do next, I found that it was difficult for me to understand my place in the world. And so I really leaned into my creativity. I've always been someone who sewed. My mother taught me to sew when I was 15 years old. And the story I had in my head was that I had hay fever. And so I wasn't able to go outside one summer. I think I was 15. And so we had to find something for me to do. With retrospect and hindsight, which is such a wonderful thing, I realised that it was also around the time that my mother was on her own, as in my dad had, they divorced, he'd left the country with his new wife. And this was also an opportunity for my mother and I to be closer to each other, to spend some time together. And I distinctly remember the feeling of having her to myself. I have three siblings and they're younger than me. So I was used to kind of, looking after them, or their needs taking precedent to mine because I could look after myself. So having my mother to myself and to sit next to me and show me how to work her Singer machine and teach me about sewing. She took me shopping for a pattern and I completely took to it. So for me, this is something that I lent into when I left teaching. And eventually it became my career, my job. I became a fashion designer. But before then, and just before then, as my job and my mind was spiraling around me, sewing and being creative has always been something that became a meditation. And often often when we become good at something or we're making something, we'll be in a position where someone will say, "Oh, make that for me," or you could turn that hobby into a job, or you could monetize that. But I will say there is value in finding something to do, finding a hobby to do, a creative hobby that you have no intention of monetizing. That is something that you can become completely immersed in and the outside world can't penetrate, whether it's cooking, crochet, writing poetry, drawing, knitting, or finding something to do. It might not even be creative. It might be something like swimming or exercise that is something that you can really get into. Another way to feel, I don't know, better about your own circumstances. Menopause is such a difficult transition for some, especially when we're trying to get a handle on our menopause care. Another way to help us to feel better about what's going on is to give back, is to volunteer. And in this busy world, it can be pretty easy to, sign and share a petition or give money to charity when you have it. But lending yourself, your physical self, to helping others is a truly fulfilling way to put your life into perspective. There's a wonderful book I may have mentioned before on a previous episode called How to Do Good Better by a friend of mine, Derek Bardwell. But it really talks about, how we can help ourselves. It also talks about the charity sector, and it drops some tea and gives us some insight into the charity sector. But certainly, I feel that exercising gratitude and helping other people can sometimes help us to step away from what's going on. It doesn't make your experience it doesn't negate it, but it does help us put things into perspective. I love how in episode 2, Mary Martin talked about sharing her talents.
Well, my routine is wake up in the morning, that's if I'm not working, go to the gym as early as possible and do my swim and my sauna. That focuses me for the day. Then I come back and I start my designs, or if I'm working, like lately I've been working with the autistic children and the older people from the generation of the Windrush, and I've been teaching them my freehand cutting, which is a new skill. Yeah, freehand cutting is showing people how to be creative and just let yourself go and relax with the fabric, and don't be frightened to cut and do these different things. And I show them my technique and it's just beautiful. They picked up the sewing so quick. Within the space of 3 sessions, which was 9 hours, they had made 3 trousers and 2 dresses, and they just learned to sew. So I thought, thank you, Jesus. Thank you for blessing these children, because they're lovely.
And staying on the topic of well-being, mental well-being in particular, but just making sure that you're making the best of this new transition in life and this new part of your life chapter, if you like. I was fascinated by Professor Joyce Harper and what she talked about with her 5 pillars approach. Listen to this.
I fundamentally believe that the most important thing for our good health and happiness is to eat good food, not drink too much alcohol, to exercise as much as we can. I mean, I don't think at this age we'll never over-exercise because we won't have the time. I think we need to sleep. I mean, sleeping's my superpower. I sleep like a log. Think about our mental health, and we need to think about our community and our friendships, because they make us so happy. And I think those 5 things, I call them the pillars of our well-being. I am absolutely a fan of HRT for those women that need it. I know some women who swear by it, but I also know women who say, oh no, I don't exercise. I'm taking HRT, so that's fine. That's not fine. Okay. You need a base level of health, and your base level of health are those 5 things. And what you build on top of that will be the cherry on the cake.
Now, what's funny is after this episode with Professor Joyce Harper, and she poo-pooed my idea of splashing my face with cold water and hoping that that was good enough. After this episode, I honestly had every intention of getting into the sea where I live. Many of you will know that I moved from London to East Sussex 18 months ago now. So I have the sea outside my door, but it's British sea. Anyway, once I'd spoken to Professor Joyce Harper, I really wanted to get back into it again. She'd written a paper about the benefits of cold water swimming for menopausal women, and I thought, yeah, I can do that. When I was 62, the episode came out just before my birthday. So 62 seemed like a great day to honour my promise. And I even asked my friend who goes cold water swimming regularly to join me. But I suppose we got our wires crossed. So when she turned up at my home on my birthday with birthday chocolates and no swimming costume, who was I to argue? And then, of course, I got on a plane a few days later and buggered off to the Caribbean. I went to Barbados, my parents' home country. I will tell you that when you sampled clear turquoise ocean, like a lukewarm bath, white sand, and you floated with your eyes to the sky as the water laps gently around your ears, the cold awakening of the Sussex coast doesn't do it for me. So maybe I'll go in when it gets a bit warmer. I know the sun's shining, but maybe I'll wait for the temperature to rise a little bit more before I go back to my promise again. So I want to talk about mothers and daughters. I have two grown-ass daughters, Kareem and Mahaney. And I will say that whilst I thought that I was alone in that I didn't want to talk to anybody about what I was going through, I didn't make the connection between menopause and my particular mental well-being and my diagnosis of anxiety and depression. And I just thought, I can't do my job. I'm going mad. And this is not an uncommon thought. When I finally bit the bullet and said, you know what, I'm not going back to my job, it was my eldest daughter. She said she had noticed it, my moods, she'd noticed my snappiness, she'd noticed that something was very wrong way before I did, but she didn't know what to do about it, and she didn't know to talk to me about it. So whilst I was busy, feeling like I was alone and I couldn't tell anybody anything because I felt like it was a sign of weakness or that I would get the sack. At the same time, people around me, including also my deputy at the time, Nardine, noticed that something was very wrong. They may not have made the connection with menopause, and I didn't either, but certainly they were the ones. And I think speaking on menopause and letting my girls in on what's been going on has been invaluable. Dr. Yancy Rolson talks about her mothers and daughters meetings a little bit further. I'll let her explain a little bit further.
One of the catalysts for the work I do was my daughter. When I was first going through it, when I found out what it was, we had a mothers and daughters conversation, 6 mothers, 6 daughters. And my daughter said to me, I don't know what you're going through, but you cry a lot and I can't help you. And I thought, it broke my heart. So
That's
we talk
heartbreaking
about it all the time. And actually her friends said the same. One of them said, my mom's changed and I think she doesn't love me anymore. How heartbreaking. So we need to have a conversation.
Absolutely heartbreaking. Yeah. Dr. Yancy has written and co-written a book called Black and Menopausal. If you're a Black woman, a Black person going through menopause, and you have not acquired this book yet, let me tell you, now is the time to go and get it, because Black and Menopausal was the first time I felt like I'd read a menopausal book that was just for me. So if you're able to get hold of one, please do. I will leave a link in the show notes for this. It's in the show notes from her episode, but I will also leave a link here as well. I will add that my sister opening up to me about her menopause experience has also been an eye-opener. I know that every menopause experience is different. No two menopause experiences are the same. But for some reason, I'd assumed, and it turns out wrongly, that she was fine. And she definitely wasn't. So it's meant that we can support each other, even though we live apart. Similarly, we assume that no one will care or that we're burdening people. But honestly, people want to help. People are confused around when we are, I don't know, simple things like opening the window, closing the window, not wanting to have the duvet on, going hot and then going cold, as well as being snappy, irritable or crying or that kind of thing. A friend of mine recently, in the last week, put something on her Facebook, status, and she called perimenopause the gift that keeps on giving, and she listed her symptoms. And my goodness me, that opened up another long conversation and gave so many women permission to speak up. Who are you speaking to? Please don't assume that people don't care. Please try to be empowered by the stories that you're hearing so that this stage is not seen as taboo. I always assume that because I talk about menopause all the time, that everybody's talking about it, and that's absolutely not the case. So I would encourage you to speak with someone or tell people the truth about what you're going through or what's happening to you. I learned more about this when I recorded a series with 9 men in my life, friends of mine, black men, who I had approached and said, you know what, I'd like to talk to you about menopause. I'd like you to ask questions. What do you want to know? And this series was for Gold Dust Radio, where I do a bi-weekly Saturday show at 11 o'clock on Saturdays every other week. And this particular series lives on SoundCloud. So if you're interested in listening to some men talk about their worries, their concerns about menopause, then hop over to Gold Dust Radio on SoundCloud. You can put in Karen Arthur. And the series is called Can We Talk? I will say that every single person I spoke to wanted to know more. They wanted to help their partners, their wives, their nieces, their people they know, their colleagues, the women in their lives who are going through menopause. So please, I'm begging you, talk to someone. Don't assume that people don't want to know. There will be someone out there. Society raises women to believe that we only have one purpose if we are serving men. That's our only purpose. So that's as breeders, for want of a better word, for looking sexy, for being accommodating, as I mentioned before. There are women who don't want to have kids, and that's perfectly fine. Often they can be given a hard time about it. But not everyone who can have children wants them. So we need to get over it. Patriarchy needs to get over it. I wanted children and I was able to have my daughters fairly easily, but it's not so for millions of women who may reach perimenopause having not been able to conceive or not found a partner that they wanted to share parenting with. Perimenopause can bring up some difficult feelings for those who are not childless by choice. And in episode 6, I was grateful to Dr. Jocelynne for sharing her thoughts.
It was difficult to accept that actually you may never have children and you need to reset your objective in life. You need to think, right, I'm not here just to make babies. But culturally, and that's where my cultural background is coming,
Yep.
As an African woman, we are very close. We have a very close family. My father met my mother at age 18, and then they got married and they had children. So for me, that was not the natural progress of any family, and that's what I was aiming for. But then when you get to that point where it's not going to happen, you need to go into an inside journey and say, what's the purpose of my life?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think in menopause, I found my purpose. I think I really find my purpose. And I think that, helping women, supporting women going through this journey is really important.
Dr. Jocelynne has an ebook called 11 Myths Busted for Black Women about perimenopause and menopause. And if you're interested in getting hold of that ebook free, I think you can get it free for the next week, certainly until mid-May. Pop to her episode and a few episodes back, and you'll be able to download it on her website there. I often say, listen to your body. When I talk about menopausal symptoms, and I talk about entering this phase, I talk about listening to your body. And you hear people talking about breathing deeply. But what does that actually mean? I take for granted, I know this stuff, I've been doing it. I learnt to mindfully meditate. I sorted a routine for myself that works for me, that I've tweaked over the decade. And I've learnt to listen to my body because I've been doing it for a long time. And I suppose it's easy for me to take for granted that just saying that glib phrase, everybody's going to understand. But I recognise that not everybody does understand. And when you spent your life, I don't know, holding your breath and preparing yourself for worst case scenarios, because the moment you relax, someone or something has pulled you back to reality. When you're hyper aware that the world makes it difficult, particularly for Black women, to relax, and then someone comes along and says, just breathe, but how? I suppose one of the things I want people to understand is that it starts when you wake up in the morning. If you're able to carve out some silence first thing in the morning, not every household is as silent as mine. I don't live with anybody. All I hear is the sea. So I don't want this to sound glib. But if you are able to carve out some silence, maybe if you're able to lock yourself in the toilet or step outside or put some headphones on, just for 5 minutes. My point is to listen then. Where is the pain? Is there pain? What's niggling you? How do you feel? Where are your emotions? Check in with yourself. Are you anxious? Are you excited? Are you worried? What are you worried about? How's your stomach feeling? Do you feel bloated? Are you feeling gassy? What did you eat last night? Did you eat late? Might that be the reason? How are your sinuses? Are you sniffing? Are you sneezing? Sometimes we spend so long in, I was going to say dishealth. That's not even a word. What's the word? Well, we've spent so much time feeling under the weather, or it's been happening for such a long time. We just kind of knuckle down and get on with it. We normalize things. Actually, if we sought professional help or we spoke to someone else, we'd find that isn't normal. I normalized waking up and sneezing every day for years and years. I thought that was just something that I had to live with. In fact, when I went to the doctor about it, my doctor said to me, prescribed me antihistamine and told me to take them every day for the rest of my life. And another time when I wasn't able to walk very well, I'd fallen down a hole, and the whole of my right side started to play up from my shoulder, down my arm, down my leg. And it got to the point where I'd been to consultants and I'd been to the hospital. And in the end, the doctor said, just take your painkillers for the rest of your life. This isn't necessary. This isn't necessary if you're able to look at the root cause. For me, when I left my job and I was able to give myself space to really look at my health, I found that it was stress that was causing a lot of my issues. So the stress was certainly something that when it started to subside, it meant that I don't wake up sneezing anymore. Yes, I go to antihistamines, but I do that when I have hay fever, which is different, you know. And when it came to taking naproxen, taking painkillers forever, well, I wasn't going to do that. And in the end, I sought yoga therapy, and I was able to find someone who was able to look at and help me with my breathing and help me to relax and really teach myself to kind of, what's the word? Bring down my central nervous system, but also breathe more deeply. We're quite shallow breathers as humans. The world is so busy that we only use a small part of our lung capacity. And so I managed to find someone who would help me to address that. And gradually my pain subsided. I'm honestly not making this up. It sounds unbelievable. And obviously there are things that we need to go to the doctors to that absolutely need more specialist medical care. But I would question things. And the more that you know yourself, the more you understand what's going on with you, the easier it will be when you take yourself to a doctor and try to talk to them about your menopause system. Dr. Atuni Johnson talks about this. I'll let you listen.
If you feel like your concerns haven't been addressed, don't stop there.
Yeah.
Find someone who will listen. And that, if that means asking to see a different professional, if that means asking to be referred, which is your right to be, if you are feeling like, you know, this is a specialist issue and I don't feel like you are, do you mind referring me for a specialist opinion? So there's lots of things that you can do to take ownership. No one is smarter than you or knows better than you about your body. And this is why part of culturally competent care is humility, to be able to listen and validate concerns from the healthcare professional. In that shared care model, culturally competent care is a very important aspect.
And Dr. Ituni also has an ebook. It's called A Personal Guide to Menopause for Black Women. And if you are able to contact her, I will put a link to her contact details because, of course, I wrote lots of things down and this is one of the things I didn't write down, so I apologise. Or email me at thekarenarthur@mail.com. I will get you a copy to have a read. It's called A Personal Guide to Menopause for Black Women. And finally, I'm going back to the first episode of season 6, the one that took me by surprise, the one where I had interviewed Ada Paris in season 5. And when I asked her if there was anybody she thought that I should interview, she said, "Has anybody interviewed you?" And it had never occurred to me. So I was a bit, worried about it, but actually it was quite nice to kind of sit back and let somebody else ask the questions, and not necessarily be relying on my specific knowledge of something, just to be able to do what I often do, which is speak from my heart and speak from my truth. So I go back to being truthful and being honest. I'm not going to leave a clip. You can go back to episode 1 of season 6 and listen to the whole thing. But I just want to tell you a little story about being truthful and also being pulled up and coming back to honesty. I am someone who tries very hard to question my motives about why I'm doing something. Like everybody, I have an ego. And there are times when my ego can get the better of me. My green tea is getting cold. Let me just take a sip. And so I managed to get myself in a bit of a tizzy just before 2024 started. So it was Christmas Eve, and I was staying with my eldest daughter, and my youngest daughter had come to stay as well, and we were celebrating Christmas together. And I was trying to do marketing for the Joy Retreat Barbados 2024. So I had spent a good 45 minutes sitting on my bed in the guest bedroom, my guest bedroom, trying to sort a reel out to put on Instagram. This is on Christmas Eve. I walked into the living room and Kareem was in there. She was sitting on the floor, wrapping presents, as you would on Christmas Eve, with a little, glass of something next to her. And I said, Kareem, can you just look? Can you just check this? And I remember her face now. She turned to me. She looked concerned, but she said, Mum, what time is it? So I said, it's 9:30, something like that, 9:20. And then I repeated that I wanted her to check my reel before I placed it on Instagram. And she said, very gently, do you think that Instagram is the best place to be, the best place, use of your time on Christmas Eve, when you could be relaxing and getting into the Christmas spirit? And those words reduced me to tears. What followed was a conversation and a hug and a holding, where both of my daughters, because at some point my youngest daughter Mahaney joined us, very gently talked to me about my motives for marketing the Joy Retreat just around Christmas. And I was petrified. I was worried. But instead of noticing these feelings and thinking, oh, maybe this is something I don't need to do, I had developed this imaginary audience in my head, and I had decided that if I didn't do this reel, then it meant that I wouldn't be able to market and reach the Black women who needed to hear about the Joy Retreat Barbados. And I also had decided that I had created this deadline that I also had control over. All this to say that I had fully intended to run and host the Joy Retreat Barbados 2024. Well, it would have been this month. But my own children, gathered me and gave me permission to breathe and let go, and to recognize what was really going on. I made that audience up. I made that deadline up. I was in control. And so there was no Joy Retreat this year, 2024, and that's absolutely fine. Not only was I not ready, it meant that I would be hosting a retreat as someone who was already, my central nervous system was already tight. And how would I be able to give back? How would I be able to give an offering as nourishing as the one that I gave and we experienced last year, if I was feeling this way, if I was feeling so het up? So the Joy Retreat is happening because I am rested. 2025, the 28th of April until the 5th of May. Save the date. It is for Black women in any stage of menopause, and I'm excited to be able to bring this offering to you once more. There will be 10 spaces, and I will give you more details in the next season. That's it. That's me. I hope you enjoyed this. When I'm talking to myself in my little podcast room, I call it, I feel like no one's listening. And it feels a little bit weird. I don't know whether other podcasters or broadcasters feel like this, and maybe it's something I just need to get over. Maybe I'll cut this out. I don't know. I'm just telling you the truth. But if you loved what I was talking about, first of all, if you haven't listened to any of the episodes in season 6, or there's one you want to go back and listen to, please, I urge you to do so. But also, if you loved this, share this episode. Like, subscribe, and follow on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Audible, Podbean, wherever you get your podcast fix. But most importantly, please keep talking. You are not alone. We need to create this ripple effect so we get to a point where not only is the topic of menopause normalized, but the diversity within this space. So you hear stories from so many women who look like you. You feel like you've got a handle on it. And if you also know someone who wants to sponsor an episode or who wants to sponsor season 7, please contact me at thekaranarthur@mail.com. Okay, that's me. Don't forget to drink your water. I'll drink my green tea. Wear your SPF. And most of all, be gentle with yourselves, won't you? Until next time, peace.